Hey everyone on LinkedIn, and welcome to this week's LinkedIn Live. And today my lovely guest is Niamh O'Brien, who is my lovely guest on the podcast for episode number 98. And I realized just before I came on live that I'm not sure that I put the link below this event or below this post. So if you don't see a link for the full podcast, I will add it when we're off this live. I also wanted to call out, and I think it was called out in the show notes, no relation. Niamh is not a relation of mine. We just happen to have the same surname. I believe the fifth most common surname in Ireland. So it's quite a common one here. Niamh, do you want to tell people a little bit about yourself, and then we can kind of talk about some of the highlights from the podcast episode and maybe have a bit of chit chat about what the kind of things that we were talking about before we came on live?
Sure. Thanks a million, Aoife. Yep. So my name is Niamh O'Brien. As I said, share a surname, but our first.
No relation.
Yeah, exactly. I work within BDO. I head up BDO Talent management within BDO. So everything kind of people related, talent recruitment, talent acquisition. Do a lot of work in that space, and yeah, I guess a little bit more detail in the podcast. I won't repeat myself fully, but I've been with BDO coming up to 3 years now, and altogether I've worked for about 20 years in the recruitment and talent space.
Gillian French is already commenting. She's laughing at us. Probably the no relation comment. I'm not entirely sure. But Niamh, we had a brilliant conversation on the podcast. We touched on a lot of different areas. I love the insights that you had to share. One of the things we talked about was flexibility. We kind of touched on the idea of the 4-day week, which is coming up a lot more often recently. And for anyone who hasn't listened to this episode, and go back and have a listen to that. But I've also recorded previous episodes twice on the 4-day week and once on the 5-hour workday as well. So definitely check those out. We talked about the idea of the Great Resignation because we talk about it an awful lot. And I did post something actually on LinkedIn a few weeks ago to see if anyone had any research conducted in relation to the Great Resignation or the impact that the pandemic has had on specific demographics. And like there is some research done, but it's not entirely what I had in mind. But one of the interesting things, Niamh, that you said was this idea of the Great Resignation hasn't necessarily really hit Ireland yet. And there's a lot of kind of pent-up demand you were talking about, and some of the reasons that maybe the Great Resignation hasn't hit, but actually it's kind of on the horizon. Do you want to talk through a little bit about that?
Yeah. Not to be completely depressing in that I think companies are already nervous around the Great Resignation, but I do think there's more to come, and certainly with the cohort of people that we're speaking to. So BDO obviously would be probably known as a consultancy firm. We would have a large bank of accounting professionals within the business. So we speak to a lot of accountants and on the external market, and a lot of people are looking to move, overseas. So I think what I said to you was it's kind of a rite of passage for people when they come out of contract, if they've they're qualified, or generally when you leave college and you get a first couple of years under your belt and then you decide to go traveling, and so a high number of people that we're speaking to are talking about the fact that they will be leaving their job, but actually they're going to Australia or Canada. So we're seeing big numbers, and that's probably still to come, because I think visas in Australia only in the last few months have kind of released up, likewise in Canada. So my fear is that there's more to come in terms of people resigning.
It's a funny one because it's not really something I had thought about previously, but I did that whole Australia thing. Like, it is kind of a rite of passage, isn't it? Like, I mean, when I went, I was 30, I think, when I went, and so a little bit older typically than most people who go over and kind of do that whole thing. And I think by the time it came to thinking about, I'd love to actually go to Canada for a year or a couple of years as well, because I can. I think I was too old to apply for the visa, or I'd been gone from Ireland for too long. I think you had to be resident in Ireland for at least a year out of the last 3 years or something like this. And I'd actually been gone from Ireland for about 7 years at that stage. So wasn't able to use that. But some really, really great insights around the Great Resignation. And if anyone does have research, I know there are some people who I wanted to follow up with who responded to that specific question on like the impact of the pandemic. I would love to understand on a kind of a broader context about that. the other thing I think that really stood out for me in our conversation, Niamh, was the idea of the alternative talent pools, and and what that actually means, and just, I suppose, giving a name to something that people are aware of some of the talent pools, maybe not all of them. Do you want to kind of talk us through a little bit about that as well?
Yeah, so I think I'd said to you, this has become a passion project of mine. But actually, once I started thinking about it, all of a sudden you notice a load of firms actually now starting to launch these programs. So a lot of companies
are programs and things, is it?
Yeah, exactly. So returner programs, and I think I've mentioned on the original podcast, we started looking at it within BDO, and initially we were probably talking about females coming back, maybe having had a career break due to children, and then we actually said that we're probably limiting ourselves in that space, and looked at maybe people who are coming back from Australia and Canada. That's another type of returner, and actually, I've seen some stats in terms of people leaving the work, early retirees, then kind of suddenly go, actually, I think it was one of my colleagues said this recently, so that people are retiring earlier, but then realizing actually the golf and the staying at home doesn't suit me, and so they're looking at
the appeal that it once did.
Yeah, exactly. So the realism of what that looks like might be different to what people thought, and so we're seeing people coming back in that maybe had retired from a role, but obviously not fully from the workforce. So a whole range of reasons as to why people are returning, or just that took career breaks, that there were carers in COVID, that became much more people had to do it sometimes where there wasn't external support there. So the whole range of returners, but for us in BDO, certainly it's experienced people that we're really looking at, and people that have maybe trained or maybe qualified, but are bringing experience back into the workforce. And massive numbers. Actually, I was at the Talent Summit, I think, since we spoke. And like I should have kept the stats, but I heard some numbers of the number of roles that are out there, advertised roles, but then the number of people who are out of the workforce, and it's multiple. So where we say, there's a war for talent, actually there's a war for talent in the areas that we're looking, but there's a whole other pool of people that are out of the workforce and maybe aren't being considered. And so I think it's a really, really interesting one.
Yeah. So, ties in with this whole idea of looking in other places and considering transferable skills and things like that. And that kind of brings us on to this idea of the future of work and, what that means. I know we spent a bit of time talking about the future of work, and I know, you do consulting on that, and the future of work essentially is now, isn't it? Like we're like, for me, the pandemic has accelerated any of the trends that we've already seen in the workplace, with flexibility that we've already mentioned in relation to the number of hours that we're working. But there's other areas as well. Do you want to kind of highlight some of those areas that we're seeing?
Yeah, so certainly what we're seeing are things like flexibility and digital first. I think a more individualistic approach to employees, so where previously, it was all about the cool pool tables, and we know the big companies that were using those to lure people in, and then all of a sudden that's gone as a method of attraction for people.
Because people are working at home and they don't have a cool pool table behind their desk.
Absolutely. And so I think it's really made companies think about, okay, well, what does our culture look like? And I don't think any company can say they have the same culture now that they had prior to COVID, because you couldn't maintain it. So it's really about thinking about, okay, what is our culture now? And that to me is what the future of work is. It's how you continue to grow and develop and build on your culture, and not using it in a sustainable way. I know that's
absolutely
a phrase that's used in other terms, but in terms of people and business growth, and really, who do you want to be as a business, and what do people want out of their employer?
It's really interesting what you say about that, the individualistic approach, because that's something I'm looking at now. The research I did for my master's, which is scarily nearly 2 years ago now, focused on this idea of needs and need satisfaction as a driver of satisfaction at work, as a driver of engagement, as a driver of happiness at work, essentially. And there are 3 universal needs that everyone has, and it's not just about satisfying those needs, it's about finding the balance between the needs. So like autonomy is the one that always springs to mind. So if you don't have enough autonomy, then you're being micromanaged, essentially. You're being told what to do, when to do it, how to do it. But if you have too much autonomy, it can be equally debilitating, or maybe not as bad as being micromanaged, but you're lacking in direction. You're not really sure what to do. But then each individual has unique needs as well. And most people, if you ask them, like, what are your needs? They'll be like, I haven't got a clue. But actually, if you ask them what's frustrating them about their work currently, then they'll be able to tell you. And by that, you can kind of tap into, well, what are the needs that are being frustrated in this situation? So yeah, it's really interesting. And I totally agree. It needs to be done on an individual level, and it's supporting managers to be able to have those conversations with their staff. One of the other things that was really interesting, I think, around this, the future of work, is this shift towards outcome-based, and I think it ties in with this idea of flexibility. So flexibility being you, and it's not just about hours. It can be location. It can be the type of work. There's lots of different definitions around flexibility, but there is this real shift towards outcome-based work. So it's not just like, oh, well, I did my 9 to 5 today and it's 5 o'clock and I'm going to log off now. It's more about focusing on what are the really important things, what are the objectives, the KPIs, the OKRs, whatever you're talking about. What are the things that I need to achieve in order to move the dial, or however you want to phrase that, in order to progress the business in some way. And so I suppose, any additional thoughts that you wanted to add in relation to that?
Yeah, it's something I actually thought about after our conversation. So I think we probably focused on the employer side of things, and how, an output-based approach is difficult, but also has to be the way forward. But actually, going back to what you just said there about your masters and people's motivations, and I think if you set up for individuals, okay, well, what fulfills you, what is going to motivate you, what achievements do you want to see in your own career, and that can then tie in really nicely together. So if you can get that right, because I think as people, what COVID has done is made us all stop and think. I call it the come to Jesus moment, where we all go, what am I doing here? But if you can find meaning in your role, which is not just you go in and you work from 9 to 5 and you complete a to-do list. But if you can come away from a day, that's the days we all love, where you think, God, that was great. I really achieved something today. And so if you can get to the nub of what motivates people, what really drives them, where they're coming away from a day thinking, that was a great day. I really feel fulfilled and that I achieved something. That's something really, I think, powerful. And I think companies need to not only see this as something that probably COVID has pushed on them in terms of being able, it's kind of part of that flexibilities, isn't it? Yeah. But I think also it will intrinsically help their culture and their people's performance. And as individuals, I think it's something that's going to really help us all if companies can get that right.
Yeah, absolutely. 100% agree. And interestingly, that kind of brings us nicely into episode 100 of the podcast is coming out on Friday. And it is a very special episode, and it's a highlights episode. But within the highlights, one of the things that really came through was this idea of meaning and purpose and impact at work. And so when people talk about being happier at work, and you might describe exactly what you're saying, Niamh, like, when you come away from a day and you think, I really achieved something, like, to me, that is what is the essence of what being happy at work is all about, that you feel like this sense of meaning, a sense of purpose, and that you have actually contributed and you've achieved something. And so that episode is coming out on Friday, and it is really all about this. It's not about ourselves. It's about impact on other people and making a difference in the world, and making a difference even just to one other person. And I think that's really, really important. I wanted to touch on a couple of other points. So one of them is that I was on holidays last week, and if you follow me on LinkedIn, you might have seen the announcement. And I took all of the social media, all social media apps off my phone, basically, and I haven't put them back on yet. And I'm really excited that I haven't put them back on yet. And I don't know whether I'm going to put them back on. So I might have to, like, for kind of business purposes, sometimes it's easier to do stuff on my phone than it is on my laptop, but we'll see how long I last with that. It was definitely a nice break, nice and relaxing. The other thing I wanted to do, if you haven't seen the announcement, the podcast has reached 40,000 listens. So I'm absolutely delighted with this.
Yeah. It's such an
thanks.
It's fantastic. Yeah, really, really impressive.
Yeah, and Pat is commenting here. He's saying one of his findings is that 70% of employees don't have a PDP, which is essential to meaningfulness and purpose. So, like not even, I mean, I think I've in pretty much all the roles I've ever had, I've always had a PDP. But that's prompted me now, maybe I should do one for now. I have like a business stuff, but I don't have my own personal one. So thank you, Pat, for the prompt there. Niamh, was there anything else that you wanted to add in relation to the podcast, or just kind of tell people to check out the full episode? The full episode, as I said, I think I forgot to include the link below, but I will add it when we're finished on this live.
You know, I just think this is, I just think generally the podcast is a brilliant way of raising these really important conversations. The happier at work just things to me. Like, I just think it's something we all need to focus on, both as employers and employees. What makes us happy in our lives and in our work. We spend so much time in work. So, you know, rather than, okay, what makes me happy outside of work, and then I have to go and do the grind. In work, I think it's such an important question. It's one I keep asking people recently. I think, I'm sure people think I'm crazy, but I'm like, what makes you happy? And people actually, they don't know, you know, quite often they haven't thought of that. And so, no, I just think it's a great topic, you know, and one that I hope you continue having conversations
around. And I think, like, in relation to that and in relation to happiness at work in general and people not knowing, I think it's this definition, the kind of general definition of what success looks like, and looking at other people, you know, looking at things like money and status and power. And I know I got sucked into all of those kind of things, and sometimes I'm guilty of it myself as well, that you get distracted by what your ego wants versus finding that great sense of meaning and purpose. And I see Fiona English, who's an absolute expert in the area of meaning and purpose, has just commented saying a big issue remains that a lot of leaders still must understand what purpose actually is. I would have to agree with you there, Fiona. And I think the pandemic has given us cause to start re-examining that, and hopefully leaders are starting to look at that, like, well, why was the business set up in the first place? What are we here for? And kind of bringing it back to the roots as well. Ariel is commenting as well, saying interesting stat from Pat around the 70% of employees that don't have a PDP, and just wondering why that is. So yeah, really great question from Ariel. Like, why is it that managers don't understand how to do them? And I know certainly, like, that tends to be an issue a lot of the time. Like, you can't really explain what it is that needs to go into the PDP, or they're a little meaningless, or people don't see the point, or it's a tick box exercise. All of these kind of things.
Yeah, but I think we're at a tipping point now that this is just essential. You know, I think, you know, people want it. You know, progressive companies have to have it. But as you said, the important part is that it's a meaningful conversation. You know, I've certainly had PDPs, and actually it's still, you know, there's no interest really in what's important to me, or, you know, is that tick the box. So I think it's something that companies absolutely have to look at. And but also, as you said, individuals, if it's not being provided by your employer, you should, you know, it's something you should still put together for yourself, because if not, you know, who's going to give you the meaning? You know, sometimes you have to go and find it for yourself.
Yeah. And I think a lot of the times people, you know, are probably going completely way off tangent, way off into a separate topic, but a lot of the time people don't really take that responsibility for managing their careers, in that they're in a specific role and they see a path and they're just going for the next promotion without thinking about the bigger picture of, well, what are the other opportunities that are out there, and what is it that I really want to achieve with my life, you know, with my career? What is it that I want to do? How do I tap into my strengths? And Fiona, actually, since she's watching live, she will be featured in the highlights podcast episode number 100 that's coming out on Friday. And one of the things she said was about, one of the things she wanted was working to her strengths. And I think that's something that we need to bear in mind, is understanding what our strengths are and how to activate them. And I think even since I've started my own business, I've learned new things that I didn't realize were strengths of mine, that I just like, I don't know whether I just didn't know or I took it for granted or something, but there's certainly, so what I'm trying to say is when you try new things, you learn that you're good at not just the stuff you think you're good at, but you're good at other stuff as well.
Yeah. And you know, I think, sorry, this is kind of off track, but I think mentors are really strong for that, you know, so I think, you know, having a good mentor, going and finding mentors, finding people that want to work with you to better you can be a really great way of doing that within
And I think, we are kind of slightly gone off topic. I'll give a shout out to Mentor Her. So I'm a mentor with the Mentor Her program and with Katie Doyle, which is a fantastic program. Mentoring doesn't have to be necessarily within your organization. It doesn't necessarily have to be within your kind of area of expertise. It could be someone in a completely different area. But
I think it's better when it's somebody outside. I definitely like within a business actually, but outside of your kind of the day to day. I think that's where it works really well.
Definitely brilliant. We're hitting on over 20 minutes, which is totally unexpected, but I absolutely thoroughly enjoyed this conversation with you today, Niamh. And for anyone who hasn't listened to the full episode of the podcast, as I mentioned, I think I forgot to put down the link below, but I will put the link now after I come off this live. So thank you so much for your time today, Niamh, and for on the podcast and for all the insights that you've shared.
No, and congrats again on the 40,000. It's a super achievement, and long may it continue. I'll continue listening anyway.
Thanks, Emil. Thanks, Niamh.
Bye bye.